Michael Brodkorb is a Minnesota Republican activist, former deputy chair of the Minnesota Republican Party, and the former communications director for the Republican caucus in the Minnesota State Senate. And he's widely credited with helping to engineer the Republican takeover of the state Senate in 2010. Michael currently works as a political consultant, as publisher of the blog politics.mn, and is a regular columnist with the Star Tribune. So let's welcome Michael Brodkorb to the show. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be on.
Good to have you here. You're a Republican, obviously,
Yes.
and one thing I'd really like to know more about is how the Republican Party has changed over the years. Almost seems to me like there's two Republican parties going on right now, the Tea Party and more of the establishment, quote, country club Republicans out there. Maybe just your thoughts on that.
You know, that's a divide that's been in the party for quite some time, and having been a former party activist and now a few steps removed from that, you really still see it. There has been a divide between, since the 60s into the 70s, Reagan, Goldwater, and others, this divide that exists between Republicans, and we really have seen it materialize with the Libertarian Party movement and the Tea Party movement. And if you could divide the presidential camps, I think, into two sides right now, it would be the Tea Party and Republican candidates that many would view to be the establishment. I mean, I think this race right now, the presidential race, amongst those that would want to label kind of establishment Republicans, I mean, I think Jeb Bush is clearly the leader of that kind of establishment pack. Now the question is on the Tea Party side, whether that's Ted Cruz, whether that's Rand Paul, whether that's Donald Trump, that type of movement. And so the question is for the party is, the establishment route and that kind of Libertarian Tea Party route, can they come together at the convention next year in Cleveland behind a candidate that can unite the party and ready to take on whoever the Democratic presidential nominee is, who at this point I think will likely be Hillary Clinton.
Okay. So I know just my experience in observing politics over the years, and I've observed it since I was a little kid. I remember being part of Republican Kids for Nixon when I was in kindergarten.
Oh, wow.
So that dates me a little bit back then. Do you think it's a good division for the party to have these, they're very separate approaches to Republican politics? You have a Ted Cruz and then you have a Jeb Bush, and just...
I don't know how, Republicans have had, in this, particularly in Minnesota, there's been the divisions that have lasted through the general election. It's been difficult for the party to come together in a cohesive unit and present a candidate that can represent all factions of the party and then still be elected in the November elections in Minnesota. That's been difficult. At the national level, Republicans have been challenged, since the presidential election of '04, when George W. Bush won. We've had Republican candidates that have come forward that even post-nomination, they've had problems with the Libertarian Tea Party groups. Mm-hmm. They tend to be activists inside the party that identify less with candidates and more with movements and principles. Not to say that the candidates that are supporting, Jeb Bush don't believe in principles. One of the principles that, I think is the divide right now is between electable and non-electable Republicans. And whether the brand presented by a general election candidate, either at the national level or Minnesota, is enough to win. And I think that's the problem that Republicans have right now, is can they present a candidate in the general election that can be nominated by their party, meaning pass the various tests that need to happen so they can get enough votes at the national convention, but yet still be electable to the broader American public. That's going to be the big question in 2016.
So with McCain and Romney, you probably went more for the establishment candidates, and that's where like a Ted Cruz or even a Donald Trump today are arguing that you've tried the establishment side, let's go for the Tea Party side or the more libertarian side, with Rand Paul, for example. Yeah. Do you have any predictions on who might be the strongest candidates for the Republicans as far as going into January? Right now I think there's 16 or 17, but maybe that top 3 or 4?
Well, tomorrow, John Kasich is going to announce, Governor of Ohio. I mean, I think he's going to be a strong candidate. This is a huge crop of candidates. And this is, we're getting bigger than Sweet 16 here at this point. And so, as much as I think, as we talked about earlier, as much as we don't like to think that at the beginning of the football season that the Patriots are going to be the candidate. At this point right now, from a money standpoint, which is needed to run a aggressive campaign, Jeb Bush has established himself as the clear front runner in the money race.
Right.
The question is, where do some of those Tea Party candidates, where does Ted Cruz, or where does Rand Paul, and where does someone, I mean, I think it would be fair to identify, at this point, Donald Trump as a bit of a Tea Party libertarian. He's not willing to rule out a third party run at this point. That kind of establishment type candidate. He would certainly be the most well-funded of those type of Tea Party, Libertarian Party candidates. They have had sometimes a very difficult time raising money to compete in a strong level with some of the other candidates.
Right.
So I think right now, it's a Jeb Bush, a Marco Rubio. We'll see what Kasich is able to do.
Scott Walker, though.
Scott Walker
Yeah.
is clearly in that mix. And then, on that Tea Party side, it's going to be, I think Trump. I think it's going to be Cruz and Rand Paul. Rand Paul clearly has, in the state of Minnesota, he has a very strong following, as does Ted Cruz, as will Scott Walker.
Right.
All of those candidates will. A lot of the old Bush machinery from the 04 cycle. 04 was probably the last time in Minnesota that we had a very competitive presidential race where there was a field operation here. The 2000 race was closer than many expected, which led them to build a pretty aggressive field operation for Republicans in 04. So we'll see. A lot of that machinery is going to be around. That has a tendency to be more of some of the establishment, a little bit more of the gray hair crowd, but we'll see where it comes at this point.
Right. Well, we mentioned Donald Trump, and no discussion of the Republican presidential nomination contest would be complete without Donald Trump. He has just recently here, as we're speaking, made some disparaging comments about Senator John McCain not being a war hero, etc. He's later clarified his remarks, saying that he is a war hero, but the only reason he's a war hero is because he was captured, and his whole story after that. Just your take on what that's doing to the Republican Party in general.
It's a distraction. Trump is a distraction, but it all depends on. There is a movement inside the party, I think, that exists in both political parties, both of the major political parties, where people are looking for an alternative. On the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders is drawing great crowds.
Right.
I think it's who do I think would more likely be elected president between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump? I don't know. I think it's pretty hard to figure out which one is less likely to happen. But both, I think, of those type of movements are people who are concerned about kind of shaking up the status quo. Trump is coming in well-financed, both personal money to bring into the race, and he's saying the type of things that identify with many Tea Party activists, many Libertarian Party activists. Yeah. His comments against McCain were horrible. I mean, they were just horrible comments to make. The Washington Post did, I think, a fantastic story today on what John McCain was doing when he was in a POW camp, while what Donald Trump was doing at the same time. And there could not be a bigger contrast. I think there are people who disagree with McCain's politics. It's very difficult to look at someone like John McCain and not think of him as someone who has paid a very significant price for the freedom that we all have, and look upon him as nothing less than. Be difficult to look at him nothing less than an American hero. And for someone like Donald Trump, who was, to paraphrase the phrase, born with a silver foot in his mouth, to take an opportunity to poke shots at Senator McCain,
right.
You're seeing Democrats and Republicans speak up and criticize that. But it is the type of commentary, that type of burning the house from the inside out. McCain, there was a lot of tension at the 08 national convention here in Minnesota when McCain was nominated. There was a strong divide between a lot of the Ron Paul supporters in 08. And so the type of comments that Trump is making about McCain in particular, sadly, resonate with some Republicans and resonate with some people that identify with the fringes of the party. And that's what's so sad, is because it's going to be difficult to see a path where Trump does anything to unite Republicans. It seems that what he's doing is he is galvanizing the type of anti-establishment movement behind a candidate, and he's going to be both a wrecking ball and a sideshow for the Republicans.
Right.
And it's going to be difficult to stop him.
And I know that was Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, another candidate that described him as a wrecking ball to the party.
And he's been very thoughtful.
Well.
Lindsey Graham has been
Yes.
very thoughtful throughout this race. What I've been very surprised about, very thoughtful on a whole variety of issues. So it was good that you mentioned him.
Yeah. Well, just looking at Mr. Trump and his, just his experience as a business person, I think people are. I'm trying to somehow find where the attraction is there. You know, he's a successful business person. He's had a lot of name recognition. His name's on a lot of products and buildings and things like that. And I think people that are possibly not as, I know I'm going to tick off some people in the audience, but people are maybe not as involved or as aware of politics and of government as you and I possibly are out there thinking, this guy, he's straight talk, he's saying it like it is, I don't care what he really says, but he's tapping into something that may, the disaffected people out there is kind of my interpretation of it.
Your assessment is spot on. I think it's, and for your listeners and those that are watching who remember Jesse Ventura's campaign, you're seeing on a presidential level with a tremendous amount of resources and someone who can rev up a crowd just as much as Jesse Ventura can. You're seeing that in Trump's candidacy. Let's not forget that what triggered this kind of war between McCain and Trump was an appearance in Arizona,
Right.
So which is McCain's home state, and some back and forth commentary. I mean, it is for any presidential candidate to draw the type of crowds that McCain is doing. I mean, that Trump is getting is impressive. He's tapping into a movement, and you are exactly correct. He is saying the type of things that, I mean, politicians will never have high popularity. It will never be very popular profession. Continuously will never be a very popular profession. So when you have someone like Trump who comes in and says things that a lot of people think, but don't want to say, they are tuning in to watch a little bit of the car crash. And that's what we saw. I mean, I worked on the '98 governor's race, and I remember seeing Ventura at many events, which we talked about previously, where he would say the type of things that only a candidate like Jesse Ventura can say. And there are statements that Donald Trump will make that would sink every other of the other 15 or 16 candidates in this race. But the fact that they're coming from Donald Trump, he's going to get a break on.
Sure. People remember him from The Apprentice. Oh yeah, watch that show every week, and here he is. He's running for president. Well, why not?
Yes.
On the Democratic side, I know we've talked about Hillary Clinton almost being inevitable. She's the New England Patriots of the Democratic race. Yep. Bernie Sanders has really picked up a lot of steam. He's rising in the polls in Iowa, but he is a self-described socialist.
Yes.
And is that almost the wing of the Democratic Party that's comparable with the Tea Party on the Republican side, or is it?
Yep, I think that's a very great comparison, a very good comparison. McCain's, when Obama came in, it was hope, and I think that there was an expectation. One of the things I think it would be fair for, I think Democrats and Republicans that want to analyze these races might agree upon, is that I think Obama, when he leaves office, there will be an element of the Democratic Party, the more liberal wing, that I think is going to feel that there's some things left on the table, that there was more he could have done.
Right.
There was more he could have pushed the envelope on. And those that have been less satisfied with the policy advancements of his administration, I think are very attracted towards the candidacy to Bernie Sanders. I think with Clinton, it could be 4 more years of the same, of this type. And so I think the burden on Clinton over the coming weeks and months is to show how she can cherry pick some of those issues and put herself in a position where she's better to deliver on those issues than someone, as you accurately described Bernie Sanders on. The problem is she can't pick up too many of them because he is a self-identified socialist.
Right.
But there will be some policy initiatives that she's going to have to find a way to weave into her campaign as she continues to build support for her campaign. But let's not forget Martin O'Malley and, of course, Joe Biden. The Hill ran a story, a newspaper of Washington, D.C., ran a story about Biden is still thinking about a candidacy.
That's right.
And so the question is, at this point, I still think it's Hillary Clinton's nomination to lose, and it would take a lot to lose it. But there are a series of candidates, I think, that are waiting in the wing. And I think Sanders, as much as he is kind of tapping in to that Wellstone activism that we've seen, that we saw in Minnesota on a national level, I think there'll be other candidates that would be nominated well before Sanders would ever be, should Clinton stumble or fall.
I agree. And with the email gate and with all of the other Clinton scandals and the possibility of a Clinton-Bush rematch almost, do you think people are, I mean, is that going to drive people to maybe a Trump or to another wild card out there, maybe a Biden or someone that we don't currently know about? That Perot in '92 comes to mind, where he just kind of came out of nowhere and got 19%.
It will be interesting to see, because I think a Bush-Clinton presidential race would be, it's like another Patriots, in the Super Bowl dynamic. I mean, and eventually, it just gets a little stale for people to watch, to see, the Patriots. I mean, as a Vikings fan, seeing the Patriots go out there and Tom Brady win another Super Bowl. So the question is if you have, in essence, a candidate like Clinton and Bush with their families have such rich history to the office of the presidency, is there a drive for someone else to get in the race? Yes. Trump is not ruling out a third-party candidate. And so the question is, who would it be? I could see having followed Trump's presidential race since he got in, and watching The Apprentice, and everybody knows him. I would have a difficult time thinking that it would just be easy for him just to walk away.
Right.
If he's building up a tremendous amount of support, and people are gravitating towards his campaign, the more he says these type of ridiculous things, as he did about Senator McCain, and very disrespectful things, the question is, where does all that energy go? I have a difficult time seeing Trump speaking at the Republican National Convention, first of all, even speaking, or number two, releasing his delegates and bringing them into that operation and just turning them over. Trump is all about Trump, and so I wonder if a third-party spoiler type atmosphere isn't what's in store for him. At this point, there's not a lot of talk about another third-party candidate.
Right.
But I could see if it was Bush and Clinton, which is, I think, I haven't checked the
most probable scenario.
I haven't checked the odds
point.
in Vegas yet, but that's if people bet on that type of stuff. But I'm sure
they do somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. So that's where I think the safe money would be. But I could see a Trump. I mean, just getting wrapped up in this, and then finding some process reason as to why he's pulling out of the Republican race, but he wants to take it to the American voters still. I mean, we'll see.
And as we know, Perot dropped out the night before the Democrat convention in '92, only to re-enter later on. I think
that is, as much as I would like to pretend on TV here that I remembered that before you said it, I did not remember it. So that is a great point.
I remember
that is a great point.
Al Gore at the time, before he was Vice President Gore, Senator Gore, announcing that we'd like all the Perot supporters to come to our side, and then I think Perot, that was too much for him. I think about a month later or so, he came back and started running ads, and it was downhill from there. But
that is a great. That is a very. I mean, that's a very good point you just made, because that could really. It shows how far this can get along, and Trump is not much different. Some would argue maybe a little better hair than Ross Perot. Some might argue a little worse, but he certainly fits that exact type of mentality, that type of person that he would want to be a part of, that type of movement. And I could see him doing the exact same thing.
Right.
Boy, that's a great piece of history.
Well, we'll see what happens. Thanks for joining us, Michael. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I look forward to another one.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
So here's a thought. Now, you think most people would agree that getting the most people possible involved in the political process is a good thing. Unfortunately, not everybody sees things that way, and it's usually the people in power. Intimidating and discouraging people you don't want to show up to vote is called disenfranchisement, and it's nothing new. Poll taxes were collected in the South to keep away the economically disadvantaged. Women in the United States couldn't vote until 1920, and Congress needed to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to ensure African Americans were able to vote in parts of the country where local and state officials openly discriminated against them. Sadly, 50 years later, there have been a number of so-called voter ID initiatives on the ballot across the country, including right here in Minnesota, where it thankfully failed. In states where these have passed, they've been shown to limit participation by minority groups, students, and the elderly. These laws require that voters present a government-issued photo ID when they come to the polls. And while that may sound reasonable at first, about 10% of the eligible voting population doesn't have an ID like that. And coincidentally, most of these folks are, wait for it, minorities, students, and the elderly. Still another trick used by groups seeking to disenfranchise is distributing false information about election dates and poll locations to certain populations. And let's not forget the most effective way to keep people away from the polls, telling them their vote won't make a difference. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. The great thing about this country is that we all have one vote, no matter who we are, where we come from, what we look like, or how much money we have. And it goes beyond voting. We can also get involved in many ways beyond voting or running for elected office, by showing up to public meetings when they're held at times we're able to attend, contacting our local officials with questions and comments, and expressing our opinions either in person or online. We can have an impact, and the more people that do these things, the greater the impact. So don't let anyone ever tell you that your voice or your vote doesn't matter. I'm Tom Bullington. We'll see you next month on Everybody Loves Politics.